Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to another video. It is your man, North Star State Politics. Minnesota had their primary, and so did Wisconsin last night. And it was a very good night for Republicans in Minnesota. Wisconsin, I am going to cover Wisconsin first because I want to cover the massive upset that occurred in the Democratic primary. Obviously, Republican Tom Tiffany, he was the favorite. He was running against I don't even know who Andy Mansky is, and then you have write-ins. So Tiffany was going to win his primary almost automatically. Um, but looking at Wisconsin, the Democratic primary happened, and it was a complete doozy. Francesca Hong loses to David Crowley. Um, David Crowley, I believe, was a Milwaukee County executive, if I'm not mistaken. And Crowley dropped out of the race recently, and then he re-entered it like a couple weeks ago. Um, Now Hong was supposed to win this primary. For those of you who don't know, if you've been living under a rock, this race was a huge, huge upset. Francesca Hong was leading all of the polling data at the end of the primary by sometimes as much as 20 points. Um, However, David Crowley pulled off the upset of a lifetime. Now there was some shenanigans in Milwaukee. That's all I will say. There was stuff going on in Milwaukee that's a little weird. There were voting machines that apparently weren't set up correctly or they didn't tabulate right, so they had to take them to quote undisclosed locations, and conveniently all those votes were for David Crowley. I'm not gonna allege anything, but all I'm gonna say is that it was a little weird. Um, but the Democratic establishment breathes a sigh of relief in Wisconsin. Now, Crowley is still a crazy person. Crowley said that he hates Christmas in a state like Wisconsin, so I would fully expect Tiffany to hammer Crowley. But Francesca Hong, can we get F's in the chat for Hong? Rest in piss. Um, she's a complete clown. And you look at this map here, Hong underperformed everywhere. Hong actually did better in Eau Claire than she did in Madison. That's all you need to know. Her home county, Dane County, home of Madison and the University of Wisconsin, Hong did worse there than she did in Eau Claire. So, I don't know. But a lot of people are speculating what happened. What seemed to have happened was that Crowley got a lot of support from rural Republicans because there weren't really any contested primaries on the GOP side, aside from the lieutenant governor primary, which doesn't really matter because that office doesn't really have a lot of power anyway. But so a lot of Republicans crossed over, especially in rural areas, and voted for David Crowley. That was a known thing that was happening. Because you look at these rural areas, the rural Republican areas across Wisconsin, northeast Wisconsin, Tom Tiffany's district, the rural areas came out in full swing for David Crowley, more so than expected, which I had expected him to go to Hong. I almost expected the inverse to happen, where Hong would do well in the rural areas, but Crowley would do well in Milwaukee. Hong almost won Milwaukee. Now, Crowley being from Milwaukee, that's a terrible performance by him. In his home county, he barely won Milwaukee County. He did pretty good in the wild counties, all things considered. But there was a lot of rural Republican voters that turned out as an anti-Hong vote because they were terrified of what would happen if she became governor in November. So that's all I want to say for Wisconsin. Francesca Hong loses in a huge upset. I don't really know what happened. All I got to say is Hong is a clown. And hopefully we'll never see her stupid face again in politics. But knowing how this works, she'll probably try to make another run for statewide office in 2020 or in 2030. So I don't know. But either way, David Crowley pulls off an upset. Not much else to say. Not much else to talk about in Wisconsin. Tom Tiffany, of course, as you see here, cruised. He won by 91 points. So I don't think anyone, I mean, people expected that to happen. So, anyway, moving on to my home state of Minnesota. This is the real meat and potatoes that I want to talk about. So, there was a pretty interesting primary that happened across the board in Minnesota, for statewide office and federal office. So, we're going to start with the Democratic primary for the Senate race. So, incumbent Senator, I believe Tina Smith. Tina Smith is retiring. So you have an open seat. This is the first time that Minnesota has had an open Senate seat, I think, since 2002 or maybe 1996. I don't know. This is the first time Minnesota's had an open Senate seat in quite a while. And all I'm going to say is that, wow, Angie Craig underperformed expectations. So, for those of you who don't know, I live in Hennepin County, unfortunately, and I live right in the epicenter of everything bad in this country. I live there, so it's awful, and I hate it, and I want to move away, and I'm trying to move to Wyoming, but I'll get to that in a little bit. And Peggy Flanagan is the lieutenant governor of Minnesota, and she was kind of the progressive candidate in this race. Flanagan was running as the leftist candidate. Angie Craig was seen as like the moderate, quote unquote, even though Angie Craig is just as equally as left wing as Peggy Flanagan. She just is really good at pretending not to be. Angie Craig, a U.S. representative from the South Metro in Minnesota's 2nd District. I thought Angie Craig was going to walk away with this. Craig had been airing attack ads across Minnesota, accusing Peggy Flanagan of taking money from companies that build ICE detention centers and taking money from AIPAC and all kinds of stuff. And Angie Craig was climbing in the polls. Flanagan had led the primary race by like 31 points in 2025. I believe there was a poll that came out just before the election that showed Craig trailing only by like 1 point or leading. And for most of the night, the election was back and forth. However, a vote dump out of Hennepin and Ramsey counties came in around midnight, and it threw Peggy Flanagan in the lead by about 20 points, and then they called the race for her. Angie Craig, I don't really know. Like, this was a bold... This race, Craig fumbled this race. That's all I'm going to say. Angie Craig, Democrats... Now, I am very happy that Flanagan won the primary because she is a crazy person. She pretends to be Native American when she's clearly Jewish. She also, she's just a very interesting person. She has a lot of baggage. And because she's far left, this does allow for the Republican candidate, which we'll get to the Republican primary in a second. This allows for the Republican to attack Flanagan for being a nutcase. So I am happy that Flanagan won this race. If Craig had won this race, it would have been a wash. Craig would have won by 15 points. But luckily, because this state is because Democrats are crazy, they voted for Peggy Flanagan. So now we have. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, just the areas that Flanagan did well in, the Iron Range, which I expected Craig to do really well in the Iron Range. I don't know why Flanagan did really well. The only part of the state that Craig did okay in was like central and western Minnesota. And even still, like, Craig only won some of the reddest parts of Minnesota by like 100 votes. So either way, Peggy Flanagan is the DFL, the Democratic Farmer Labor nominee for Senate. And honestly, that's good news for Republicans because on the Republican side, Michele Tafoya, former Fox NFL reporter, has won the Republican Senate primary in a wash. She defeats the GOP endorsed Adam Schwarza. Now, I like Adam Schwarza, but I voted for Tafoya. Now, I'm gonna give a little spoiler alert. Every single candidate I voted for statewide office in Minnesota won their primary for the Republicans. Every single one. The only race that didn't quite go my way was the Hennepin County attorney race, which I don't really know if I need to cover that on here. Maybe I will in a different video, but I don't know if people really would care about that. But yeah, anyway. So Michele Tafoya, she's a former NFL football reporter for Fox News. She was seen as the heavy favorite to win this primary, despite the fact that the GOP endorsed Adam Schwarza. Now, this race, I mean, I don't know what people expected. Michele Tafoya, people are accusing her of being a rhino. Now, all I got to say is, yes, Tafoya has said some things in the past that could be taken to be anti-Trump. However, at the same time, people need to understand that Tafoya is running in a state that voted for Kamala Harris by almost 5 points. You're not now. If she was running in a state now, if she was running in like North Dakota or Iowa or like Montana, I would say yeah, Michele Tafoya is a rhino. But she's running in Minnesota, and Tafoya, of all the candidates in this statewide race, aside from Ron Schutz for Attorney General, has the best chance of winning. I will cover the Attorney General in a minute because the DFL didn't have a good night in Minnesota. The DFL completely bungled these primaries. And I love it. This is great. So also internet clown Royce White, and forever, and loser, schizophrenic loser Royce White got third place. That Schwarza murdered him. It wasn't even close. I had internet beef with Royce White for a while last year. I don't think I ever talked about that. But me and him were in a bit of a Twitter war last year. So either way, I am glad that he lost. Fuck you, Royce White. You're a clown. You're a dickhead. And I don't know what you were thinking, dude. You suck. So going into November, Peggy Flanagan versus Michele Tafoya. I think Tafoya will do very well because Tafoya takes a moderate stance on social issues. I don't necessarily like that, but this is Minnesota, and you do need to make inroads in the Twin Cities to win. I think Tafoya has a real shot at this thing, especially since almost 40% of the Democratic primary electorate, of the Democratic voter base, does not like Peggy Flanagan. Now, granted, the DFL is really good at coalescing around people when they need to. That is kind of something that I've realized is that the DFL is really good at the DFL voters are really good at being team players in comparison to the Republicans. But this could be different. I don't know. I'm thinking this Senate race in November. I think Tafoya's got a real shot. She fits Minnesota's electorate perfectly. She's calm. She's level-headed. She's seen as more moderate, and she has arguably more name recognition than Peggy Flanagan does. The only thing that does concern me about this primary is that the DFL absolutely clobbered the Republicans in turnout. Almost 700,000 people turned out for the Senate primary for the Democratic Farmer Labor side, while for the Republicans, only like 406,000 people turned up. Now, I think part of that is because the Senate primary was so bitter. But I'll tell you what, I did not expect Flanagan to do as well as she did. But still, Flanagan's got some questions to answer. So we'll see what happens in November. So, looking over to the governor primary. Some votes just came. Interesting. So, for the DFL side, not much to talk about for the Democratic side in Minnesota. Amy Klobuchar cruised to victory. I don't think that's a surprise to absolutely anybody, though she didn't get over 90% of the vote. And Kobe Lane actually did okay. Actually, believe it or not, Klobuchar didn't do so hot in Hennepin County compared to what she probably should have done. Now, I think this does raise questions for Klobuchar in November, because there are a lot of Twin Cities progressives who hate Amy Klobuchar because she's, a part of the Zionist wing of the Democrat Party. She's a part of the pro-Israel wing. Klobuchar will probably win those voters because, Minnesota DFL voters are, team players and they toe the party line when they have to. But we'll see. The Republican side is what I'm interested in. I mean, yeah, you can see here the Twin Cities, Klobuchar won the Twin Cities by 80 points, whereas Klobuchar won the rural areas by 90 points. So already that, Klobuchar doing 10 points worse in a place, in the Twin Cities, that's not good. That's not good, especially since Lisa Demuth, which we'll talk about here for the Republican primary, is from Greater Minnesota. So Lisa Demuth on the Republican side, she is the winner in this race. Thank the Lord. I am like, and that's not, I'm not saying that to be sarcastic. I'm saying that genuinely. I am thankful to God that he answered my prayers about this race. Mike Lindell is a clown, and his dreams were put to bed by Minnesota voters yesterday. Across, so he did pretty well in greater Minnesota. I will get like northern Minnesota. That was expected. Now, Lisa Demuth was able to hold the line by winning in the Twin Cities. She was able to win an overwhelming majority in Hennepin County. Without Hennepin County, Mike Lindell wins this race. So, all things considered, yeah. This race was, this was a good primary. Lisa Demuth, yeah, she's a moderate. Yeah, she has some stances in her past, like some stuff she said in 2020 that a lot of Minnesota Republicans are seeming to have problems with. But I think people need to understand you're running against Amy Klobuchar, and you're running in Minnesota, which is a blue state. Walz won re-election in 2022 by 8 points. And you're up against a juggernaut of a federal official who has won every single election she's ever been in by over 10 points. So yeah, I didn't really want Lindell. Lindell would have probably lost close to 20 points, if not more. However, because Demuth is the Republican nominee, thankfully, yeah, I think the GOP has not like a real shot at winning the governor's race, but it definitely is going to be more competitive than it was before. Instead of losing by 28 points, she'll probably lose by 8 to 9, which is good enough for me, because that doesn't drag down that doesn't drag down the lower offices. And I also think Michele Tafoya being at the top of the ticket will help Demuth. So I don't know. We will see what happens in this governor's race, but for now, R.I.P. Mike Lindell's political ambitions. They were put to bed. And yeah, I'm excited to be hopefully volunteering for the Demuth campaign, and trying to help prevent Amy Klobuchar from winning the St. Paul governor's mansion. But that probably I'm sure she'll win, but it's worth a try. Moving on to we already went over the Senate primary, the Attorney General primary. So this is the one I'm especially focused on. I am especially focused on making sure that this dickhead, Keith Ellison, does not win his primary. Does not win the general election because he won the primary. So Keith Ellison is the incumbent Attorney General of Minnesota. In 2022, Keith Ellison almost lost this race. You take a look at, it was the second closest statewide. I believe it was the second closest attorney general race in Minnesota history. You take a look at the results here. Yeah, Ellison only won by 21,000 votes against a relatively unknown Republican candidate in Jim Schultz. If Schultz had more fundraising and if Schultz had better name recognition, I firmly believe he would have defeated Ellison in 2022. Now, since then, and mind you, this was mainly over concerns about crime. This race was competitive because Jim Schultz accused Ellison of being soft on crime, which he is. Ellison was barely able to hold on because he managed to do just good enough in the Twin Cities, suspiciously, to hold on. Even though polling data showed Jim Schultz was going to walk away with it. But nonetheless, what do I think will happen in this race? Well, so Keith Ellison is a chronic underperformer. And he didn't even get 85% of the vote as an incumbent statewide official against this dude, David Maggett, who I don't even know who he is. He's nobody even knew who this guy was, and yet he was able to get almost 1 in 5 Democratic primary voters. David Maggett got 1/5 of the Democratic of DFL voters. That should be a 9-alarm fire for the DFL in Minnesota. This race is, all things considered, a big concern, because Keith Ellison is vulnerable because of all the fraud scandals that have happened here in Minnesota, because Ellison is perceived as being weak on crime. You have and you throw in the fraud stuff. Yeah, people are not happy with Ellison. And really Ellison, I think, is in some trouble because he couldn't win. He underperformed he underperformed most of the other Democrats, and I mean he lost 1 in 5 of his own voters to a no name. On the Republican side, Ron Schutz won uncontested, but still, yeah, Ron Schutz is a strong candidate for the Republicans, and I think this Attorney General race is going to be competitive. Considering in 2022, where Minnesota had a statewide level blue wave because of abortion, because of abortion and, talks about COVID-19 and political extremism, Republicans kind of suffered because of Scott Jensen at the top of the ticket, going up against Walz, who was pretty popular at the time. Now, with the DFL being relatively unpopular and Keith Ellison being the most unpopular statewide official of all time in Minnesota, yeah, this race is setting up to be interesting. This is a pathetic showing by Ellison. Now, could some of this have been Republicans crossing over to vote for Magid? Maybe. But still, I don't know. It's a concern for the DFL. Yeah, so I guess other races in Minnesota, if they have them on here, do they have the Secretary of State race on here? Oh yeah, so there's the other races. So for Secretary of State, you have Tad Jude. I wanted Tad Jude to win. Wendy Philips was the Mike Lindell-backed candidate. Tad Jude should hopefully give Steve Simon a good run for his money. I don't think it'll be as competitive as it probably should be. I think Simon will win probably by about 8 to 9, but nonetheless, Jude should make things interesting. Not much notable here, but Tad Jude, he's kind of a local name in Minnesota politics. He's been a bit of a perennial candidate as of late, and he actually used to be a Democrat in the 1980s when he was a state rep, or state senator, I mean. But still, Jude, I don't know. I have confidence that Jude might make things interesting. Maybe not. I don't know. Looking at the state auditor race, Scott Jensen, the 2022 Republican governor nominee, destroyed Nate George, the Republican-backed guy. Not much to say here, other than, Scott Jensen hopefully should give Zack Filipovich a good run. I think the two races Republicans will probably flip in Minnesota in November are state auditor and attorney general. Again, in 2022, people don't know this, but the state auditor race in Minnesota in 2022 was actually closer than the attorney general race. The Democrat, Julie Blaha, only won by 9,000 votes in 2022. With Scott Jensen being a much more well-known candidate than Ryan Wilson was, which is actually Lisa Demuth's running mate, by the way. Scott Jensen, I think, should be he has better name recognition than Zack Filipovich. I think the auditor race will be interesting. I think of all the races to most likely to go Republican, this one and the attorney general's race. Yeah, I don't have much else to say, but yeah. So overall, I guess to summarize the Minnesota primaries, Republicans had a good night. Electable candidates. Electability was clearly a concern for most Minnesota Republican voters. And it really showed because at the ballot box, Michele Tafoya, Lisa Demuth, they won their primaries, and the DFL nominated crazy person Peggy Flanagan for the Senate seat, which is going to hopefully will allow Michele Tafoya to maybe come in and steal that seat and become the first Republican senator to win an election in Minnesota since 2002. Obviously, I think Flanagan is the favorite right now, but that could change. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I don't have much else to say. Make sure that you do everything you can to stop the Democrats in November, no matter where you live. No matter if you live in a swing state, a blue state, a red state, make sure you do not let the Democrats win anything. Because the Democrats, again, these people are evil. These people are crazy. They want you killed. And if you even think about compromising with them, just know you're compromising with people who would celebrate if you got Charlie Kirked. You are, there is no deal making with communists. They openly want to make your life more miserable. They want to fill your streets with drugs and crime. Um, yeah. So whatever you do not let Democrats win. And the worst thing you can do is vote for a Democrat or sit out the election. Make sure you get out and vote for every Republican you can. That's my advice for these midterms. Make sure that we retain President Trump's trifecta, if not expand it. Make sure that Republicans in your state, especially if you live in Wisconsin, make sure that David Crowley is not allowed anywhere near the state capitol or the governor's mansion in Madison. And make sure that we get Tom Tiffany to the governor's mansion in Wisconsin. And hopefully he can terraform Wisconsin into being a redder state than it is. But whatever you do not let the communists win. Vote straight ticket Republican for everything you can. Make sure in local government, make sure to vote at the local level too, especially county attorney, sheriff, city council. Make sure you are voting in those too, because those have more of a direct impact over your life than a Senate race does, than a presidential race does. Make sure local and statewide politics and offices are the ones you vote in for your top priority. Thank you all for listening. Godspeed to all of you. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your week. Peace out.